Long before Richard Pryor became a household name and one of the most influential comedians in American history, he was a young man from Peoria, Illinois, who enlisted in the U.S. Army with the hope of escaping the turbulent circumstances of his childhood. Growing up in a neighborhood defined by poverty, violence, and the absence of a stable family environment, Pryor longed for something more. For him, joining the military seemed like the perfect way out, a way to leave behind his chaotic home life, travel the world, and perhaps build a better future. However, Pryor's military experience was far from the adventure he had imagined. Instead, he encountered a series of disillusioning experiences that would later fuel much of his comedy. Pryor's enlistment in the Army came in April 1959. At the time, he was just a 19-year-old with big dreams and little direction. He was shipped off to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where he was assigned to the Corps of Engineers for basic training. Fort Leonard Wood, however, had a reputation among black soldiers as one of the most racially hostile bases in the Army. This initial exposure to military life quickly shattered Pryor's idealistic notions about service. Instead of encountering camaraderie and adventure, he found a hostile environment filled with racism and discontent. Instead, it served only to reinforce the sense of alienation that had plagued him throughout his life. Pryor's time in the Army continued to spiral downward as he was transferred to Germany. The stories he had heard from returning black soldiers about life abroad had painted a picture of freedom and less racial prejudice than back home. These stories, which painted Europe as a utopia for black soldiers, seemed to offer the hope that his service could be the escape he so desperately sought. But this dream quickly crumbled when he arrived at Kaiserslautern, a base in the heart of the Rhineland, an area steeped in Nazi history. There, black soldiers were unwelcome in the local taverns, and the base itself was predominantly staffed by officers from the American South, many of whom held deeply ingrained racist beliefs. The racial tension was palpable, and Pryor, who had already begun to feel the weight of this hostility, soon found himself in even deeper trouble. In January 1960, Pryor's disillusionment reached its peak when he was assigned to guard a Nike missile at a remote part of the base. This task, which seemed trivial and menial, marked the beginning of a string of disciplinary issues. One day, he found himself in a confrontation with a colonel, during which he shouted profanities in Spanish, calling the officer a gringo monkey and chingada madre, two highly offensive terms. Although Pryor never fully explained why he resorted to speaking Spanish, it is clear that this moment was a reflection of the pent-up frustration and rage he felt toward both the Army and the racism he encountered on a daily basis. Pryor's troubles escalated further in July 1960 during a screening of the movie Imitation of Life. The film, which centered around a light-skinned black girl trying to pass as white, sparked a heated argument between Pryor and a white soldier. As tensions escalated, Pryor, in a fit of anger, pulled out a switchblade and attempted to stab the soldier in the back. However, the soldier was oblivious to the attack, and Pryor, realizing that his efforts were futile, discarded the knife and fled the scene. His actions led to his arrest and confinement in the stockade, an experience that marked the end of his brief military career. At this point, it became clear that Richard Pryor and the U.S. Army were incompatible. The brass offered him an early discharge under honorable conditions, which he readily accepted in order to avoid facing more severe consequences. Although his time in the Army lasted less than 18 months, it was a transformative period in Pryor's life. His service introduced him to new places, people, and experiences, all of which would shape his worldview and influence his comedy. In his autobiography, Pryor Convictions and Other Life Sentences, Pryor reflects on his time in the Army as a formative experience, one that showed him the world beyond Peoria, and underscored the deep-seated racism that would become a central theme in his later comedy. The Army experience also had a profound effect on Pryor's understanding of authority, power, and race. One of the most significant influences on his early comedic material was his basic combat training instructor, a man who had fought in World War II and was deeply scarred by his experiences. Pryor recalled how this instructor, who had been unable to reintegrate into society after the war, was deemed unfit for civilian life, and instead was given a job training young soldiers. In Pryor's words, the Army couldn't let him on the streets, so they gave him a job. Can't let him on the streets, so we'll let him train these guys for World War III. This experience highlighted the dysfunctionality of the military system and the psychological toll it took on many soldiers, a theme that would later be explored in Pryor's routines about authority figures and his disdain for oppressive systems. Although his time in the Army was short, it provided Pryor with a treasure trove of material that would become the foundation of his comedy career. His early stand-up performances often drew on his time in the Army, where he would recount the stories of his misadventures, his clashes with authority, and the racial tensions he encountered. These experiences, though painful at the time, became the raw material for the dark humor that defined his later work. Pryor's comedy was groundbreaking not just because of its sharp critique of racism and social injustice, but also because of its unflinching honesty and vulnerability. Unlike many comedians of his time who adhered to more traditional, sanitized forms of humor, Pryor was willing to confront the complexities of race, class, and identity head-on. Richard Pryor's influence on the world extended far beyond his time in the Army, as his experiences laid the foundation for a career that would change the landscape of comedy. By boldly confronting racism, social injustice, and personal vulnerability, Pryor carved out a unique space where humor became both a tool for healing and a weapon for social critique. His authenticity and willingness to tackle uncomfortable truths resonated with audiences of all backgrounds, and his legacy as one of the greatest comedians in American history continues to inspire new generations to use their voices to challenge the status quo. Pryor's work remains a testament to the power of comedy to provoke thought, promote empathy, and bring about change in society. If you like this video and know someone in the military, please share it with them. Thank you for watching.